Okay, this hangout is on air. So today, welcome to Kate and me, and I've got a room full of nice participants and some students have just left us, and we are doing a workshop for the HEA at the University of Chichester, and it's on embracing open learning. And part of that is navigating and negotiating different web platforms and using them to help our students and do different things. And so I'm going to be facilitating this end where we'll hear comments from the floor, because not everybody is logged in separately, but basically we are, as a group, viewing the process on a big screen and experiencing it, and people are tweeting as well while it's going on. So hopefully that will work. And look, there we've got another person. That's amazing.
Hello.
That is so cool. So I'm going to copy a link. This might be tricky because Lucy's in the same room as me. But I'm going to tweet this. So Kate, can you tell us who you are and your engagement with open learning?
Wow, so I'm Kate Green 28 on Twitter if you want to tweet me, and I guess my story is that I was an undergraduate at Coventry University, and I did the PicBod and Phonar open photography courses, and then I got so super into the communities and what that could possibly mean, and then that kind of just turned into me becoming a learner in these spaces to then actually helping develop new classes. So the beta version for Phonar Nation, which was Cali Phonar, which then turned into Phonar Nation. So that was a super exciting time in 2013, 2014. And ever since, I'm kind of just dabbing back into that and how we can remix it and trying to see what other communities could benefit from these open spaces, really. So that's my story.
That's great. Can you tell us a tiny bit about what is Phonar?
So Phonar is photography and narrative. So it was an undergraduate class it was for third-year photography students, and basically it kind of was a 10-week module whereby you would there would be kind of contributors, photographers, and there would also be kind of academics as well, who were talking about different parts of photography and storytelling and what that could mean. So talking about the sort of roles and responsibilities of a storyteller, and kind of the vulnerabilities as well, especially in online spaces when we tell people stories and how things are read differently online as to when they're in print, for example. So all these different conversations came about, and we engaged as students on Twitter, and we got to speak to these people, and we got to speak to people like Marcus Bleasdale and all sorts, and all the different things that came out of it were fantastic. I mean, some of my work eventually was published on the BBC website, and that would never have happened if it wasn't for that community, I guess. So I'm in debt to it.
And those links with the professionals that you mentioned, that wasn't something that the people, that you or Jonathan Worth, who was running the course, you didn't organize those links beforehand, did you? Or did you?
I mean, I think Jonathan probably had it all set up in his mind. So when we would have the class, so he would generally interview these people before the session. So then we would all be in the room and we'd all have our headphones on, just like how we are now. We'd all jump on a computer, and it'd be really weird. The whole room would be silent. And meanwhile, we would kind of go through these videos or sound clips, and we'd go at our own pace, so we could pause it and we could just have a few moments to reflect. And we'd often always have our Twitter open as well, so we'd use the hashtag Phonar, and then we probably usually include the handle of the person we're talking about, so it would be at Marcus Bleasdale, for example. So that's kind of how we were rolling, and we were just reaching out to these people, asking them questions, reflecting about what they were saying, and then suddenly all these other people would then kind of come in and say, oh, what are you talking about? So we'd share the link with them, and then they would come in and contribute. It was really ecstatic. I mean, we in our cohort, we trended locally, which was fantastic. So I don't know if it was really not fabricated, but I don't know how much of it was really planned, but it just snowballed. So yeah.
So I'm trying to juggle tweeting and talking to you and and thinking.
It's a skill.
The skill. There you go. So I've just sent something. But yeah, I think it's that idea that it snowballed and people. It was really useful. You were able to engage the students that way with the concepts and material in a really well. I mean, they actually engaged with it. No? Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some people who were particularly, it's actually the year after ours. I mean, our year, we were really chatty. We really got on really well, and it was fine in the room. We wouldn't have too many awkward silences in the cohort. There's about 19 of us. But the year after ours, I mean, I didn't really come in as a student. I'd graduated at this point, so I actually came in and taught a little bit. But this group was super quiet, and some people in the room were kind of felt really not very confident about putting their hand up or asking a question or contributing to any of the discussions. But it was really odd. It's kind of a sense of safety, being able to write things and being able to reach out to these people when in a room they would never have said those things. And some of these reflections that some of them said were amazing. You would never have thought it would happen, but it's kind of having that kind of safety there. I mean, it's not necessarily the most secure way of sharing notes, but it's a really great means to do so.
What about their blogs? Because the students also they wrote reflections. Some of them commented on their coursework and wrote things in blogs. How was it to get them to willingly engage with that? Because presumably not all of them had experience with using a blog.
No, I mean, I think part of the whole of the whole undergraduate course was in the first year they did suggest using blogs. I mean, they said, you can use other means, you can have a sketchbook if you like, but a load of us just jumped onto it because we thought, well, most of us hadn't done it before, so it was quite exciting. And it sort of became a bit of an easier way of doing things. You can categorize your posts, so you can actually cross post across different modules and all those sorts of things. And it means that if you're trying to look back at stuff, it is so handy if you tag things correctly or you have a means to do that. So in terms of actually getting people to engage with it a lot more, it's when we did weekly tasks, it's more so for PicBod, which is picturing the body, which was a second year module at the time.
That's Matt Johnson, yeah?
So that's Matt Johnson, and who is also Photo Book Club, by the way. So he set loads of weekly tasks, and that was actually based not in Twitter, but generally speaking in Google+. And he said, oh, could you please share your post on your blog into Google+? So then there'd be sort of nearing the end of the week when the deadline was looming, and everyone would just jump on and say, hey, here's my work. And then it was a great opportunity for people to actually just tap in and look at other people's stuff and comment. And part of the community guidelines for that was you should be commenting on other people's work. And that practice was really new. I mean, although we had been writing for ourselves for our first year, we weren't very good at giving people feedback, but having a community where there was guidelines that we were kind of meant to be doing this. It wasn't for a grade, but it was so empowering to be able to take other people's advice and really grow, and not just the advice of our classmates, but the advice of people who were not in the room. So it was great.
That's brilliant. Look, we've just been joined by David Preston, who's very kindly woken up really early because he's in California. So thank you for that, David. But Kate was just talking about students engaging with blogs and having guidelines and forming a community and how comments and support were useful. You gamified your whole English class for several years, and I'm hoping you'll drop us a tweet and tag it HEA Open with that fantastic video that one student made as the intro to your class at one point. But that's beside the point. Would you be willing to tell us something about the community, and if you gave them any guidelines, and how you engaged students with their blogs?
Well, first of all, Laura, thank you for inviting me. And unfortunately, in California, rain used to be considered just weather. Now it's some sort of meteorological miracle, and my connection was affected. So I'm on my phone right now. And that brings me to how I started what I did in my courses. My students were already connected, and they were connected everywhere but school. So when I was growing up and when many of us went to school, school was the interesting place. School was the place that you went to go get the media you couldn't find elsewhere. And today that obviously is reversed. So I started using technology in courses as a way to save paper and sort of as a homework excuse removal system so that people could find information wherever they were and whenever they found it. What I realized was that there wasn't really a sense of ownership. And so you can talk about community, but unless you empower and encourage people to own their own spaces, what you really have is a command and control an environment and a one-to-many broadcast. So I didn't have guidelines. I invited students to create spaces for themselves where they could express themselves online, certainly to respond to course material, but also to include elements of their own humor or their own aesthetic. And I reminded them that there's no back row like in a traditional classroom where you can slink down and be invisible on the internet. And the interesting thing was that no one did anything wrong. I mean, we're talking 10 years ago when the internet was a scary place. There was porn and gambling, and someone might try to sell you a car. Would students do the wrong thing and use inappropriate language? The interesting thing was when a student wasn't present or when a student adopted a tone other than what their peers were used to, their colleagues would consider it a cry for help, literally. They would ask what was wrong or where were you? And what I saw was the sort of helping mentality and the sort of approach to conflict that many adults wish we could teach top down, especially in America. We have a big emphasis on the concern for bullying, for example. But this was really a collaborative mentality that started from the beginning. And yes, we ran games and interesting moments, and everybody could do whatever ruse that they wanted, but gamified to me again implies that when you open a board game, somebody else has already created the rules, and the real benefit to freedom is that you can't be given it. You have to take it. You have to really adopt it and make it yours. So over time, what happened was we didn't call students students or even learners. We called them members. We called our courses networks. And the first thing I did every year was I didn't introduce this as a best practice. I mentioned a possibility and asked if there was interest. And it was up to the students to adopt it. I used to leave the room and let them discuss it and decide where to go from there.
That's brilliant. It's good fun. I think that idea of allowing students the room to engage is really important, whatever the medium and whatever the framework. I've certainly had that experience as well, where sometimes there are some people who don't want to engage in a certain way, and they find a different way to engage and be useful and make things meaningful for them. And when students are able to make things meaningful for them, that's when the true learning happens. And it's much more effective than me telling them you have to do this, and if you only do it this way, then you'll get full marks, and that's the end of the story, because it's that doesn't actually serve them in their sort of life very well.
Well,
I'm going to turn off my mic and the floor if they have any questions. So keep going.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, Laura, that we're also losing out on dozens and dozens and dozens of people's thinking. I used to be a management consultant primarily in my career before I got into teaching, and if someone leaves a meeting and doesn't give you the benefit of their perspective, it's almost like stealing. So if I'm in a room with 40, 100, 200 students and I don't know what they're thinking, I'm losing a lot.
Okay, I've got a question. How did you, this is for David, how did you, after you've thrown out this invitation to the students, how did they gamify the class? Can you give us a brief rundown of what happened?
Sure, and because I'm on my phone, it's not easy for me to do links, but I'll be happy to send this out later on from my laptop. So one example was Haruki Murakami wrote this wonderful book, 1Q84, and I took a bunch of jokers and put QR codes on the other side of it. And there's a wonderful quote from the book about reality and how it's perceived, and multiple realities. And the QR code went to a mystery blog. The mystery blog had clues that were hidden you know, fonts the same color as the background that you had to highlight in order to read and that kind of thing. And it started them on a treasure hunt through real and virtual space. Every day in my course, I had a journal topic for the students to respond to using old school Egyptian technology and pen and paper in their journals. But what I would do is put some of the letters in blue. So if you noticed them and followed them through, the letters in blue would spell out a message and either lead to another clue, lead to a blog, lead to a conversation with peers, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that's really fascinating to me is how little use we make of digital tools for good fun. How little use we make of the public internet for turning students loose and engaging them in full discovery. So a big part of what I try to do through gamifying that portion of the course was not just for the students to get passionate about something and collaborate and start to work in teams and then compete, but it was also to rehabilitate their curiosity. You know, my daughter's 6.5, and at a young age, we all ask dozens of questions every day. In school, I don't worry that school is doing a bad job. I worry that school is doing the bad things very, very well. And one of those things is teaching obedience. Eyes on your own paper, think your own thoughts, don't talk to anybody. And over time, students stop asking questions, so that by the time in America the students are in high school, if you ask them, hey, what would you like to learn about? It's a very difficult question to answer because they've been so conditioned to responding and not to creating that, you know, having them in a gamified environment really sort of blew their hair back and they started identifying possibilities. So I can, again, there's an article in the Pedagogy Handbook that Howard Rheingold's group created called Sphinx in the Labyrinth, and I'll send a link to that too because it goes through step by step.
I've tweeted that one.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks.
But Kate, can I ask on the back of that, because Kate's dealt with university students, the idea that David's mentioned about asking questions and having that sort of drilled out of you, the whole method of group tweeting things and reaching out to professionals and blogging about things has to do with exactly that. Did you find that there was a learning curve for people, or was the invitation to engage and reach out enough to encourage them?
I think there was, well, like you say, there's some people who really choose to engage heavily in this kind of new practice. I mean, for a lot of us it was brand new, and we were kind of encouraged to behave in a sort of a certain way, kind of saying out what would be the most appropriate way of using this tool and what would be the most appropriate way of using that tool in these circles. But so some people did really feel empowered and went with it, really went to town and would super reach out to people. But then naturally there are people who aren't as engaged, then they're not as interested in, you know, because the other thing, of course, is that your online identity will then changes if you talk about one thing and then suddenly you like really switch over to something else. I mean, that's really going to affect, you know, your digital footprint, I guess. So some people didn't choose not to engage for that reason, because they said, well, you know, I could lose a lot of my credibility, although I'm really interested in photography. I actually want to be known more in these spaces as this. So I guess it's kind of a mixed bag. I mean, it's great there as the invitation, like you say, and then just having the opportunity to be able to embrace it or not. I mean, it's completely up to the students. I mean, they weren't penalised for not engaging, so I mean, so no one's losing.
Okay, so I've got a question, which is, do you want to say the question? I'll hear it.
So essentially, are we going to have two forms of university? One where everyone comes on site because they want face-to-face learning, very expensive, but face-to-face, and the other being all online, flexible, distributed learning. What are we going to have in the future?
Big question.
Well, I don't think there's any substitute for face-to-face interaction, and I think that technology, in all of its forms, is a wonderful way to amplify and accelerate those moments. I taught at UCLA for 11 years, and even in a class, in a lecture hall where there's more than a couple hundred people, you lose that interpersonal energy that comes with sharing space. I don't think that the future is going to be altogether different than the present, in the sense that different people learn in different ways and want different things from each other and experiences. So I think that there's always going to be a market for those who want or need an expedient path to a credential that enables them to do a particular job or provide for their families. I also think that there will always be people who seek to get a little bit closer to the truth. And so whether that's the physical sciences and experimentation in real time and space, or whether that's the humanities and psychology and really experiencing other people up close and personally, I think it would be a shame to live in a world where people didn't come together and do those things as well.
Okay, I've got a question from Lucy. She's been great at the first hangout. Been asked.
So just prompted by what you were just saying, I'm going to turn my mic off.
Okay, turn on your mic.
Can you turn your mic off?
Is tricky doing it in the same space as someone else. So I'm wondering, you're talking about the lecture hall, the value of face-to-face, but I'm wondering whether what we're doing now with a smaller group, even though we're not in the same room, does this have more value than a lecture with 200 students, even though you're in the same room as them, and you can see the way that they're responding, but not necessarily have the spontaneous work.
Did you get that?
No, I'm sorry. Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah, I can. Is this hangout where we can see and talk to each other, even though it's distance and not physical, I can't reach out and pat you on the back, is this better than a lecture hall with 200 people?
Is it better? That's like asking me my favorite song. I think that there are certainly wonderful things about both, and I think that there are drawbacks about both. The lecture hall is a place where we can do this as well. We can have a Twitter feed, or we can have video that provides the up close and personal. The benefit of the lecture hall is when the lecture's over, someone can walk up to me afterward and I can give them a hug. I don't get to do that today. So I think in the absence of being able to be in the lecture hall, this is wonderful. I get to bring on from California and talk with people in England, and I don't even know where else because I got here late. So this is a beautiful thing, and I would champion this any day of the week. This is why I use this so often in instruction, because one of the things that I've really come to deep understanding of is that the traditional classroom is a closed system. And in a traditional classroom, the professor or the teacher has all of the responsibility not only for content, but for the ethos of the environment, the management, etc. And I really believe we have such a rich opportunity to connect with everyone who has what we need, that this environment provides us a chance to find the mentors and the resources and collaborators that we're most interested in. So, for example, I had a student walk into an English class and say that he wanted to learn to fly a plane. Well, by putting him online and reaching out to people that weren't in immediate presence, we found a pilot, and 3 months later I found myself in the backseat of a small plane 3,000 feet over my home. Those kinds of opportunities, I think, are only possible when you go online and seek out the people that are not in your space. But as to better one or the other, I'll cite my daughter again, because whenever I give her a choice between A and B, she says yes. So I'll still say I prefer an environment where we can have affordances for both.
I just jump in there and I guess kind of come from like a recent student perspective. I mean, the lectures are great. I mean, they can become quite passive as a student. You just kind of sit there for an hour and think, well, where did we start? But it's interesting that I love being in these spaces, but like you say, there isn't that physical interaction. There isn't that energy in the room. Like I'm in a room which is designed for 13 people. I'm on my own, but it's kind of it's not saying one is better and one is worse, but I feel that when students are empowered to have a say and being able to ask questions, I mean, I would rather that we can use technology or the means for students to be able to perk up. So whether that is a back channel on Twitter, or whether that could be using something like Blab, which I'm only really recently come across. So if there's a kind of a session where you can jump in and just say like, oh hey, sorry I couldn't come into the lecture today, but I'm at home and I'm dialed in and I can just ask a question. I mean, these technologies are just evolving and forever become more inclusive. So I'm all for that. I mean, I work now in a lab where we're trying to experiment and break the lecture theatre, you know, so that we're not having this lecturer students, and that we're trying to mix them up a bit more so that students become, you know, much more, well, they ask more questions and actually want to take ownership of their learning rather than just being a lot more passive. So I'm all for students asking questions. So yeah.
Kate, do you think there are any technologies that we should stay away from? Or, because it's very difficult to pinpoint things, also, are there any specific caveats or things that you advise them, or?
Okay. Well, I would really just suggest looking at all of the terms and conditions and the privacy settings for, especially on these social online environments. I mean, I really just, I'm on Facebook, but I would not recommend it if you want to own any of your own stuff, any of it. So I would just really advise anybody to, before, even as learners, to come in and actually just say, but, you know, these are the spaces that we might be using, but you have a choice of whether you want to engage in them. You do not need to sign your life away. You know, you do not need to sell all of your, you know, intellectual property to these things. So it's just kind of digital literacy, really. We need to make sure that students feel empowered and understand what is happening in those spaces, what is happening to their data. So this is something I'm really interested in at the minute, and looking not necessarily at formal learning spaces, but informal learners and vulnerable people who feel like they are safe in these spaces, but truly, are they safe? Not really, but they don't know about it because they're ill-informed. So we really need to make sure that this is something that is on the agenda, that when we are in these online spaces that we truly understand what that means. So.
Yeah, one thing that I highlight with students is the idea of informed consent. So anything that I'm suggesting they use or suggesting we might use, one, it doesn't preclude them from the content of the course if they don't use it. So it's not like you have to. And also that they look up to find out that there is informed consent, because oftentimes things use your stuff and it's sort of assumed. So it can be tricky. We've got 1 minute left. So any positive last thoughts of connection, ways forward, and things you want to pass on?
I think you just hit the magic word, Laura. It's all about connection. Yes, I agree with Kate fully about informed consent, and I think that too few of us are mindful when we turn on our machines about knowing how we participate, whether or not we're actively participating. I also think that we live in a time, especially since 9/11, which to me seems like yesterday and to most of our students seems like ancient history. You know, we've lived in this constant desperate times call for desperate measures. If you don't do X, Y, and Z, the terrorists win. Be afraid, be very afraid. And I think it's time to get over all of that. I think it's time to approach things with our eyes wide open, learn more about ourselves, connect with what makes us able to pay attention and reflect with clear eyes and learn about the tools in our environment. Technology, just to be an English teacher geek for a moment, doesn't mean tools. It means the clever use of tools. It's from the ancient Greek, and this is not a new concept. So if we live in the information age, I think it's high time we explore more deeply these wonderful opportunities to connect with information and the people who use it, and maybe in that somehow we can connect more effectively with ourselves.
That's great. I think, thank you very much. Thank you, Kate, for making time to be with us. Thank you, Lucy, for joining us. Thank you, David, for waking up really early. And yeah, connection. And on that note, I'd encourage everybody who is participating here today, my students, those listening, watching, all of us, be brave and connect. Write comments, tweet to people, email them, say hi, give them a hug. So, your virtual hug for the day. And on that note, off we go.
Bye, Laura.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.